After this prayer, Jesus went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley. There was a garden there, and he and his disciples went into it. The place was known to Judas, his betrayer, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas made his way there with a detachment of soldiers, and with temple police provided by the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were equipped with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, knowing everything that was to happen to him, stepped forward and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they answered. Jesus said, "I am he." And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they repeated. "I have told you that I am he," Jesus answered. "If I am the man you want, let these others go." This was to make good his words, "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Thereupon Simon Peter drew the sword he was wearing and struck at the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put away your sword. This is the cup the Father has given me. Shall I not drink it?" The troops, with their commander and the Jewish police, now arrested Jesus and secured him. They took him first to Annas, father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest for that year, the same Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be to their interest if one man died for the people. Jesus was followed by Simon Peter and another disciple. This disciple, who was known to the high priest, went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter stayed outside at the door. So the other disciple, the high priest's acquaintance, went back and spoke to the girl on duty at the door and brought Peter in. The girl said to Peter, "Are you another of this man's disciples?" "I am not," he said. As it was cold, the servants and the police had made a charcoal fire and were standing round it, warming themselves. Peter too was standing with them, sharing the warmth. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus replied, "I have spoken openly for all the world to hear. I have always taught in synagogues or in the temple, where all Jews congregate. I have said nothing in secret. Why are you questioning me? Question those who heard me. They know what I said." When he said this, one of the police standing near him struck him on the face. "Is that the way to answer the high priest?" he demanded. Jesus replied, "If I was wrong to speak what I did, produce evidence to prove it. If I was right, why strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, as Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, "Are you another of his disciples?" But he denied it. "I am not," he said. One of the high priest's servants, a relation of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, insisted, "Did I not see you with him in the garden?" Once again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a cock crowed. From Caiaphas, Jesus was led into the governor's headquarters. It was now early morning, and the Jews themselves stayed outside the headquarters to avoid defilement, so that they could eat the Passover meal. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charge do you bring against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have brought him before you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and try him by your own law." The Jews answered, "We are not allowed to put anyone to death." Thus they ensured the fulfillment of the words by which Jesus had indicated the kind of death he was to die. Pilate then went back into his headquarters and summoned Jesus. "So you are the king of the Jews?" he said. Jesus replied, "Is that your own question, or have others suggested it to you?" "Am I a Jew?" asked Pilate. "Your own nation and their chief priests have brought you before me. What have you done?" Jesus replied, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If it did, my followers would be fighting to save me from the clutches of the Jews. My kingdom belongs elsewhere." "You are a king then?" said Pilate. Jesus answered, "King is your word. My task is to bear witness to the truth. For this I was born, for this I came into the world, and all who are not deaf to the truth listen to my voice." Pilate said, "What is truth?" With those words he went out again to the Jews and said, "For my part I find no case against him. But you have a custom that I release one prisoner for you at Passover. Would you like to release the King of the Jews?" At this they shouted back, "Not him! We want Barabbas!" Barabbas was a bandit. Pilate now took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and placed it on his head and robed him in a purple cloak. Then one after another they came up to him crying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and struck him on the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Here he is. I am bringing him out to let you know that I find no case against him." And Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple cloak. "Here is the man," said Pilate. At the sight of him, the chief priests and the temple police shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" "Take him yourselves and crucify him," said Pilate. "For my part, I find no case against him." The Jews answered, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die, because he has claimed to be God's son." When Pilate heard that, he was more afraid than ever, and going back into his headquarters, he asked Jesus, "Where have you come from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" said Pilate. "Surely you know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you." "You would have no authority at all over me," Jesus replied, "if it had not been granted you from above. And therefore the deeper guilt lies with the one who handed me over to you." From that moment, Pilate tried hard to release him, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend to Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king is opposing Caesar." When Pilate heard what they were saying, he brought Jesus out and took his seat on the tribunal at the place known as the Pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation for the Passover, about noon. Pilate said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They shouted, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Am I to crucify your king? Said Pilate. We have no king but Caesar, replied the chief priests. Then, at last, to satisfy them, he handed Jesus over to be crucified.